Please welcome our esteemed panelists for CISOs Unchained.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the very last session, or as another way to put it, we're Alicia Keys' opening act. My name is Charles Blauner. Welcome to CISOs Unchained. The idea behind the session is a little bit sort of inspired by the cryptographers panel, which is always one of my favorite parts of the conference, where you have just four smart people talking about what's top of mind. It's always been difficult for CISOs to do because when you work for a big company, it's hard to speak your mind on something that will be on YouTube tomorrow, as this will be. But the four of us have all recently stepped away from corporate life into our new lives, and thus we are unchained and free to speak our minds, which is the focus for today. So let me introduce our esteemed panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves. Maureen.
So thank you, Charles. I'm Maureen Allison. You know, I think we're pretty lucky we showed up in clothes today, not pajama pants and T-shirts, right, and flip-flops. We're all appropriately dressed. I'm Maureen Allison. I recently retired a little over 13 months ago from Johnson & Johnson. I'm happy to say I'm a now recovered CISO from a Fortune 10 company. Have also been at Medco, which was another large healthcare company, Avaya Telecommunications, A&P Foods, and a bunch of government stuff. So I'm happy to be here.
Renee.
So I'm happy to be here, and I see some people in the audience that I've known for a long time. This is my 28th RSA conference.
Woo.
So I think that deserves something, don't you? And I was a CISO for, so I've actually been in the industry for about 30 years. That doesn't mean anything because there's people that have been in it as long. But I was a CISO for Coca-Cola, Time Warner, Royal Caribbean, and most recently Campbell's. So I've been actually I heard the word the other day. I now have a post-retirement portfolio. So I work with startups now, and I really pay attention to the customer journey so that people that actually implement some of these solutions actually are getting value on day two, not, 365 days later.
Tim.
So I'm still recovering. I've just finished my last CISO gig at SAP. I've been a 5-time CISO, Northrop Grumman, GE, Fidelity, Thomson Reuters. So
A slow learner.
I'm a slow learner. That's right. 23 years, FBI agent in my first life. So very happy to be here with my friends and colleagues. And yeah, I'm doing the same thing. I'm now an operating partner with Sin Ventures, investing only in cybersecurity companies, which is a great transition, I would say. So.
And as I said, I'm Charles Blauner, just for point of reference. I first became a CISO in 1997 in JP Morgan, and then I was a CISO at Deutsche Bank and Citigroup. So pretty much 22 years as a CISO, except for a year as an investment banker. Before we get into things, though, one of the things that we wanted to do and take a moment this morning to do is take a moment for Steve. Everyone who is a CISO anywhere in the world who aspires to be a CISO owes that to this man. Damn it. I didn't want to cry. But Steve was, if you didn't know it, the very first CISO. In 1995, Citigroup created the title for the very first time. Steve was my boss at JP Morgan, and he quit to go and take that job at Citi. He was the kindest man I ever knew. And if you don't understand the impact he's had, in this industry, none of us would be here today if it wasn't for Steve. Man, we all miss him. And Maureen, I know you had a chance to meet him through the Healthcare ISAC, so.
Yeah, he's kind of my inspiration, and what I mean by that is we're a group of failures for retirement, okay? And so was Steve. but it was because of his love of cybersecurity. And I met him, worked with him for 5 years on the HISAC, the Health ISAC, as we were standing that up. And so it truly meant a lot to me in the visionary and the guidance and how relevant he was up to just a few months before his passing.
Renee?
I knew Steve for a long time. He was the most humble, giving individual, unassuming. I last saw Steve just before COVID, so in 2020, and I had 2 people with me that worked for me at my last job, and we saw him, you know, walking on the hall floor, and I said, "Steve," and I introduced the 2 individuals, and he took an interest and asked them some questions, and then he kept walking, and I just said, "You were just really in the presence of greatness."
Tim?
Always a positive influence. I mean, I would mostly see him at the conferences of Manta and others, and always had time for you and anyone else, you know, to give that sage advice, you know, dare I say wisdom, that somebody like he had. So certainly I agree, just that somebody we all should look up to and appreciate.
Yep. So we miss you, but now let's get into things. We're going to start out a little slow and timid, and then we'll get a little bit more excitable, sort of like Tina Turner and Proud Mary. I hope I didn't get a copyright strike for what I just did. But we also want you to engage with us, and so as much as this is possible, we're going to ask you to find the mics on the sides and join us in the conversation. This is sort of unstructured. We're each basically going to ask each other questions. And so, Maureen, why don't you start us off while I sit down?
Okay, well, there we go. So, you know, all 4 of us are at RSA. We could be in a Barca lounger, we could be on the beach, we could be doing all sorts of things. So what is it about cybersecurity that you love so much?
So for me, there were sort of 2 things that I loved a lot about it. One was it was just hard as hell. And for whatever masochistic reason, I like really hard problems. The other thing to me is that I've always felt that more than other kinds of industries, this was as much of a community as anything. And I loved being part of that community. I mean, and some of this goes back to Steve and the idea of community and nurturing. I mean, Steve was the leader behind, it was a group of 6 of us that created the FSISAC, all right? And that's about community. These conferences are about community. And so I'm here because of community. And I love cyber because it's hard as hell, and there's this great community.
I just loved being in this industry. As I said, I've been in it for about 30 years. And so for me, it was about thinking forward on some level. I mean, there were some basic things, but I remember thinking, I was everybody's first, second, third client. I was Kevin Mandian's, I think, 3rd client or something like that, and I made him give me a ride home in his car.
We've all been Kevin's clients, right?
We've all been Kevin's clients. But I remember, but here's what they did for me. Somebody came to me and said, "Do you think you should be testing those websites to see if they're vulnerable or not?" And I thought, what an idea. You know, maybe we ought to do some of that. And so I loved the time that I wasn't active in the role, because I truly believe we kind of built this industry. And the reason I still love it is because I don't think the challenges are going away anytime soon. So they're maybe getting a little bit more daunting, because I think that there's a lot more opportunity for things to be impactful on people's safety, sense of safety. So I love just thinking about, how do we continue to evolve and make sure that we're prepared, for whatever comes next.
You know, that question on the websites, I asked my IT organization, hey, you think we gotta test these puppies? And they said, nah, we don't think so. So the Iranians did and brought it down. So then we started testing. Hey, Tim, you wanna be a CISO again?
It's a great question. I'm still recovering, so I'm not sure I should answer that question. You know, and certainly the things, you know, I always say what I've loved about being a CISO, and then I'll transition to the would I do it again, is I still remember my father was a doctor, and he always said to me, you know, beyond working for yourself being the greatest thing in the world, it was the fact that every day was different, right? And you're always challenged. So that's what's great about cybersecurity, you know, as an industry, as a role, as a profession, from my perspective, and the team, right? You could be a competitor, you know, on every single day, but still share openly, which is very unusual from my perspective. So in terms of would I do it again, I say yes. I'm not saying that actually right now. I'm loving what I'm doing right now, but I think with the appropriate controls in place and the right practices, which we should talk about,
We will talk about.
to protect yourself from liability and everything else, and really make sure you have your back covered in the role so that you can perform, you know, I always say, as your best athlete in position. You need to make sure if you're entering into the space, those things are happening. And people like us have been mentoring others, you know, new CISOs, current CISOs, to advise them on everything from the contract they're going into, the team they're going to be working with, the employer they have, the culture they're going to deal with, and how to do that.
We'll come to that. Renee, why don't you
I'm going to ask
take
the next question.
question.
So we actually crowdsourced our questions since we didn't have a moderator. So people really want to know, what does the future of the CISO role look like? Anybody jump in?
Well, I guess I'll jump in. First, I think the role of the CISO is going to evolve in a couple of ways. But most importantly, it'll evolve in that it will crystallize into something specific. I think one of the challenges we have today is the definition of what a CISO is so different from place to place, which opens us up to a lot of potential difficulties. So I think the future is the CISO is like the CFO or the Chief Compliance Officer, in that it's precise, but also in that it's as much as part of the business leadership team as a CFO would be. And so I think that's the quick answer to it.
Yeah, you know, I would say that today when you say CISO, it can be everything, you know, it's kind of like soup and nuts, and it's all, everything in the kitchen sink is all together, and it's not clearly defined. You can be people that are just one step out of being sysadmins, or into IT security, and then, but everybody wants a CISO title because that sounds cool.
Not so much anymore.
Until you have to wear stripes, it's not going to be so cool. But, you know, I've seen a lot of my peers over the years, oh, you know, and I'm going to get privacy, and I'm going to get whatever. And I'm like, yeah, good on you. I kind of like to have my lane. And I think that's really, as you had said, Charles, I think it's really going to get to, it's going to be very defined like the CFO. You don't see the CFO being
The marketing officer.
the marketing officer, right? You know,
Generally.
or HR, right? But you will see this come down to a body of work, and then see the education things that we'll need around understanding the P&Ls, right? Can you understand that return on investment, the risk? All of those things will become skill sets that will move us having to have technical, but also these new skill sets.
Tim, anything to add?
Well, you know, I mean, I'm kind of watching it now that I'm on the outside, and you're seeing CISO roles grow. They may begin to own infrastructure, you know, which I think depends is good. I think you're right. It depends. I never said there was one size fits all for a CISO at any company. It depends on your industry, depends on the company, the culture. I do think, right, you know, I think that the CISOs have a right to make some demands in their role, to have certain authorities that are very clear to do what they need to do. And I'm hoping, and I'm, you know, certainly this group wants to help them set themselves up for success in the roles. Because I agree, there's really no other role. I mean, maybe the CFO of a company has as much exposure externally to the government, to marketing the products, to sharing with others in industry.
To the SEC,
To the
being
SEC,
unhappy.
yeah, so, no, I mean, we just work across the whole company on every given day.
But I think the other thing that's going to be most important for the CISOs as they evolve, and then Tim, I'm going to turn to you for the next question,
Yeah.
is the best CISOs are fundamentally going to be business people. And until they fundamentally are business people, it's always going to be a challenge to get a seat at the CEO's table. So Tim, why don't you take the next question?
Yeah, so one other discussion we wanted to have was with the increase in legislation that's occurring, not only here in the US, but globally, do you all see that that is having a positive impact on the cybersecurity and security industry and for CISOs?
So for me, I say yes and no. Okay, I think that the legislation.
I love that.
Do you like that?
Yeah, yes and no.
Yes and
Keep
no.
going, but I do like that. Go ahead.
Okay. And the reason being is that I think for companies, and somebody once said, oh, you're in healthcare, you're below the poverty line. And I took offense to that, of course. But what I realized was in healthcare we were. It wasn't until we got the HIPAA regulation in the security rule that we actually raised up. And then at that time, PCI came out, and you also had Sarbanes-Oxley. So all those things came out, which kind of made you had to raise that boat to at least there. So legislation helps the CISO then. But the problem is everybody gets tied around compliance and not security and risk, which has to have threat in it. And the threat has changed. So if you look at the threat and why we put in Sarbanes-Oxley, it was because of financial reporting. And so that hasn't totally changed. But our threat, whether it be nation states or criminal or hacktivists or insider, it is changing every single minute. And so we cannot rely on regulation we can't sleep at night because there's good regulation. We need to have good security, which is dynamic.
Great.
Yeah, and I will say, having come from banking, I mean, banking, I think, generally has been viewed as the most advanced of the sectors from a security perspective. In the old days, it's because they were the big targets, because the only way to monetize crime was to steal money. Now there are ways to monetize crime in lots of other ways. And the banking, it helped that we were so tightly regulated, and that you had these third parties coming in, the regulators, to actually examine you. And it helped that when the regulators were unhappy, it became a board level issue.
Correct.
I do think that while the SEC is going around, things in a bad way, their intent is good. The problem is there isn't, at least from a US legal perspective, a legislative framework to operate in. And so I hate saying this, but this is a place where it'd be great to have someone define good so that there's a well-known target that we're going after. I would hate government to do it in isolation because it would be a horrifically bad outcome. But this is where public-private partnership can really be effective in trying to actually get a good outcome from a regulatory or legislative perspective.
The only thing I would add is that, the law, I think, has demanded a certain level of transparency about the program now and also what the governance mechanisms look like. So I think that the fact that boards are also in the new boat.
But you have to read those 10Ks. You'd think that all the companies out there that are in the SEC, they have no OT, because they never talk about OT risk.
You know what, I actually gave a talk about this, about the rules. So I actually started reading the 10Ks for companies from 2022 and 2023. Yeah. And I actually did find a company that had OT in it, but it took a long time.
One out of 1,000,
Sure.
And they've all got OT environments.
They do.
A lot of them do, but we're gonna
We can
move
share,
on.
you want to, I got the two-parter, remember? I got a two-part question.
Well, yeah, no,
He
but,
gave us 2 parts, and then he
yeah, no, no, but
Yeah,
we
you
may
know
have a
what, the
two-parter,
answer-
but,
the
Yeah,
but,
this is
but I'm
an
also looking
unruly
at, I'm
group
gonna,
here.
I'm looking at the clock, so I'm gonna move us on.
All right, all right. But this is an important one. It's a
We'll give
little-
it to you, Charles.
Yeah, no,
this
we
time.
will.
The
we
answer
will-
is no.
be- no,
You don't
because.
want to be on boards?
No, because I think these tie together. I mean, the reality is part of this then comes down to the role of the board.
Yeah.
Right, and there's been a debate about whether there should be security people on the boards or not. But the reality is, and you can talk about that, but the reality is the three of us were all successful to a greater or lesser degree in engaging our boards even before they were forced to talk to us, right? And so I'd like to hear a little bit about how you engaged your board, but I'd also like you each to tell me what was the dumbest question you ever got from a board member?
I've had some.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll go first. My dumbest question, right, I'm in one of the biggest banks in the world. This is my first board meeting, and my board member asked me about fraud on his personal credit card and whether the fraud limit really was $25. So
Mine was, why can we not go on the offensive and attack the attackers? To which my response was very eloquent, explaining why, the legalities of that, and the prosecutions, to which I was told, are you an idiot or a lawyer? Which I said, I'm not a lawyer. And so, there you go.
Yeah, mine was, can I stop the spam that they get in their email box?
Okay.
I had nobody ask me a stupid question or a dumb question. I did have a board member ask me after I told him that I was planning to put some segmentation in the network, and he said, how are you planning to do that, with software or hardware? Now, he was the only person on the board that actually understood cyber. So all the other board members were like sucked in their breath, and they waited while I, gave my answer. And as soon as I gave it, he was like, okay, that's good. And the rest of them started breathing again.
So, but how did you engage? So you were lucky.
I was
Not too many
lucky.
stupid questions. How did you get them to even pay attention?
So one of the things is that there are some companies that they knocked on and said, hey, can you come and talk to us because we want to understand this new area. They're talking about these things called advanced persistent threats, and they come from China. Can you talk to us about it? And so we did that. One of the other ones, you just had Nailu. Nailu was the speaker. My company was at J&J. They brought her in. McKinsey could see that we were having problems like engaging. And when I got to J&J, I'm like, oh crap, there's this like really long hierarchy I'm gonna have to get up for them to hear me. But what I have a strong will, and I refuse to give up. So I'd get one quarter, I'd get this far, and then I'd get the next quarter, and then I'd get the next quarter, and then I'd get the audience. And I did have a little luck. The CEO and I went to West Point together, and I was an upperclassman. And so I said, like, Alex, I didn't haze you, did I? Please? He said, no, you never did. But one of the things was having the conversation with him. And then finally one day he said, Maureen, come to lunch in the executive dining room. And I want you to know, you will never eat lunch in the executive dining room, even if it's sitting before you, okay? And so I sat there and talked to him, and we had a long discussion. And we had both had the same education at the time at West Point. He said, how did you learn all that? And I looked at him and I go, Alex, how'd you become a CEO? How'd you learn all that? I said, we took different paths. And so getting that human response to it, and then I got invited to the board. And then it was once a year, and then it was twice a year, and then it was 4 times a year. And so you have to just keep going down the path.
Yeah, and I think the point you made about building that relationship is really important. I mean, so like Tim and Renee, I mean, why don't you sort of build on that?
Which, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, so first thing was personal relationship, right? So I always demanded that I had access to board members, even at a one-on-one level. I could sit down and have lunch with them. And because I didn't know if I needed to take them from first grade education to 8th grade or from 8th grade into high school on the topic. So that's very important. I think one of the more mature things we did at one of the companies was the company had what they called explorations, which was for executives and board members to go explore part of the business for a week. So we inserted a cyber exploration program for executives and for board members, which was pretty comprehensive. It was like 2 days in DC, you visited Homeland Security, you had all the speakers come in from all the different agencies, and we really bathed them in the topic. So that was sort of the hardcore version of getting them understand or even demonstrating a hack or a break into one of the products that we may have had. So I'd say that's the far end, more expensive version of doing that.
It's funny because I took, again, I've had a few jobs, right? And the board, the last couple times, there was somebody on the board that I had worked with before at a different company. So
Again, it's a human relationship,
Right,
right?
it's human relationships, and sometimes you get lucky and you take advantages of it. Marina, why don't you give us your next question?
Oh, now I have to pull it up, Charles.
Yes,
Thank
you do.
Well, doesn't I have that controversial one that,
Well, it's a,
did you ever feel like you got a punch in the gut while being a CISO from a fellow employee or your company?
I'm answering.
Okay,
It's mine.
go for it, Renee.
So honestly, it was about 2004, maybe. And I worked for the CIO, and there were 4 directs, and I was one of them. And I thought, I'm doing pretty well. And went to a meeting, and there were 20 people in the meeting. One of my peers was in the meeting. And he literally, in front of 20 people, said, "You just have no idea what you're talking about. None. Don't know what you're doing." And all I could think of is how rude, and all these thoughts went through he was downright belligerent, all right? And I remember walking out of that meeting, and HR had been in that meeting. So the head of HR was in that meeting. And I said to the head of HR, "Did you see that? Did you see his bad behavior? Did you see what happened there?" And he said, "If you don't know how to handle yourself in a difficult conversation, perhaps you shouldn't be the CISO for this company."
oops.
And I went, "Whoa." So I thought, oh my goodness. And I then talked to my boss. He wasn't in the meeting. I said, this is what happened. And he says, I'm glad that you're coming to see me about it, because I was getting ready to fire you.
You?
Yeah. Well, we won't go there either, but
Why you?
you act shocked, okay. So, but he said, look, you've got to really be able to have these difficult conversations. So he got me a coach, and there are books, and there are courses that you can take. Well, it turns out this is a hard thing, and not just for women. This is a universal problem that men can't do it. In fact, I would tell the guys that work for me later on, I'm not going to fight your battles for you. If you're at a meeting and you can't make sure that you can handle yourself, don't come crying to me. But that's...
See, I never had that problem. I went to West Point and to the FBI. So, that was not
I knew you
something
wouldn't
in the
have had that
Army, so
experience.
that was not really ever.
Live fire going over your head.
Yeah,
so
nah,
no
I
big
was
deal.
never, yeah.
Yeah, no, I remember we had a difficult topic about a Windows migration, and I remember we were very prepared. We had talked to all the business line CIOs before sitting down with the lead guy and the whole management team. But 2 of the CIOs were really unhappy with each other. And so they decided to go to war at this meeting using me as the ping pong ball. And I just got the crap kicked out of me. And 4 of my leaders were in that meeting with me. And they asked me afterwards, about it, because I wasn't crying or anything. And I had to explain to them, and this was actually more of a lesson less for me than for them, that what happened in that room, even though it looked like they were beating the hell out of me, had nothing to do with me.
Right.
It had to do with a completely different circumstance, and I was just a vehicle. And so I think you have to learn to depersonalize a lot of these situations. And so, Renee, you've got the last question, given timing and the nature of your question. And I'll ask that if anyone in the audience hopefully has questions, that while Renee's bringing her last question up, you go to the mics, and if not, we'll just keep chatting. But there are mics in the 2 aisles.
So someone asked, what was the biggest chain or obstacle that you had to overcome either personally or professionally?
Okay, I know you had one piece of that. So, I mean, for me, one of the more interesting sort of chains we had operationally was the tension we had between the security organization and the legal organization. And that tension came up in a lot of different areas, whether it had to do with disclosure or other things. But the strangest thing, and this goes back to part of the LinkedIn conversation, has to do with this idea of fear of finding out. And we had this whole program from an anti-phishing perspective, just like almost all of you do, where you hire someone and they just go out looking for copied websites. And if they're malicious, you go through the legal process of getting them taken down. And it's all standard procedure. But my lawyers went bonkers when I wanted to try to do this, because there was a side effect, which was if we found sites that weren't malicious, but were just infringing on the copyright, now the lawyers had to do something about it, and they didn't want the work.
Making work for others.
I was making work for others, and they wanted me to stop searching for the phishing sites, and I said no. And so, yeah, I took the chain of worrying about the lawyers, and I just said, no, I'm going to just do the right thing, and I broke that chain.
And so I wanted to answer this because I never thought of not knowing. You know, it's that fear of finding out. Either you don't want to know what it is, you're already underwater and you're already overwhelmed, or God forbid that you're probably partially responsible for whatever that situation existing in the first place. But I don't know how you don't know, you know, and I don't know how that would look 6 months later. And so I think that's a chain that I see some people putting on themselves. And I will say this, had I not wanted to know what was on a ship besides, you know, the games and the signage, I never would have learned that everything that actually is responsible for that ship, you know, that cruise ship, is really an OT-IT system, you know, and nobody in IT was supporting that, really. And I thought, you know what? And that's how, you know, we started working with the Coast Guard, you know, in the maritime space, was because we recognized that there was a lot of stuff that can go wrong out in the middle of the ocean.
It's a great point. I mean, one thing you said was you put your chains on yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
And so my reflection is a little bit of that question of when someone said something to you, but also the chain you put on yourself was, and I'm not going to ruin the East Texas twang that he said it in, but it was very much like, Tim, I do not think you understand the power you have as the CISO of this company. And I was a young executive, which he was basically saying, nobody wants to go up against you, and you don't realize that, you know, in your decision making. So it was sort of one of those twists to, like, you know, actually use the power that you have within the company to drive the execution. So
My coach actually told me that I couldn't run. She said, when you run, the whole building cuts unglued. Like, they see you running.
Well, you know, and one of the things is I started out at West Point where they told me, no, you can't do this. and I stopped listening and I graduated, right? Like, okay, I can do this.
I mean, you're not going to brag, so I'll just brag for you. I mean, you were in the first graduating class of women at West Point. So
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, so you're not just at a tough school for women, you're groundbreaking at a tough school for women.
And then I went into the FBI, and they weren't really totally sure of what they were going to do. So I kind of grew up with, you know, like, stay in my lane of security, but if it has security, anything in it, it should be in my lane. And so I just kept going. And, you know, in the day, it was, you know, IT security, the system security, and product security and OT security were like domains that didn't exist. But I didn't see those lines. Yeah. I said, okay, I'm just going to go in there. So I unchained myself. Now, there's a few business executives that probably didn't want me in their stuff, and that's okay. But, when they asked about who knew where, what all the products were and what their connectivity was at a board meeting, and the president of the division didn't know and didn't have anyone who knew, and they say, is there anybody in the room who knows? And, like the little hand that goes like, I do. Like, well, why do you know? Because I have to secure it if it's connected. And so those become that goes into the role of the CISO. We have to unchain ourselves from what the governance or people have told us we're responsible to we are CISOs and have a requirement. SEC is saying you're responsible. Move into those areas. People might not like it. They may throw whatever they can at you. But you're the CISO. Go in, head up, eyes straight ahead, and figure out what it looks like.
We have a question over here, so just say your name quickly and go away.
Anya Tvishor, Federal Reserve Bank Supervision. What do you think got easier for CISOs over the last 10 years? What got more challenging, and how would you address those challenges?
Wow.
Easier?
Did anything get easier?
Well, I think the technology got easier to start looking at all the technologies. So on the converse, what got harder was data went everywhere. Because like when we started, it was all like on an AS400 in the basement, right? Like, here's my data, and there's a rack app on it. It's so cute. But then what happened is let's do distributed, and let's put servers under people's desks and all of that. And then we went mobile, and then we went cloud, and then now we're doing this thing and the other thing. But then all of those things put data in all sorts of different places, which also helps to create AI. So it got harder to go where the data is, but the technology now, I can scan there, I can go there. There's things that I can use to make GRC tables. I don't have to calculate it myself.
I'm going to answer your question slightly differently, because what I'm going to say, because you asked what got easier and what got harder, I'm going to say the answer is nothing. Because if you go back to the late 70s, early 80s, there were two fundamental problems in information security: identity management and patch management. All right? We've moved a little bit forward in time, and there are two fundamental problems in security: identity management and patch management. All right? The tech stacks that we keep solving the problems for change, but we fundamentally have been solving the same problem over and over and over again for generations, not human generations, technology generations. Hopefully we're getting smarter at it, and now with data and AI, we'll get some advantages, but regulatory pressure, the attacker landscape's never been worse.
Yeah. I mean, I believe it all got harder, period, end of story. Well, only because, I mean, if you look at it, budgets all increased. The roles, 20 plus years ago, all they cared about was Tim patching the system so we didn't have a worm running across the network 22 years ago. The roles on the teams, you can go all sorts of directions now as a security professional because we've continued to develop GRC and the operations centers and trust roles and everything else. So I just think it's all gotten a lot harder, and the role went from, maybe once a year with the board, if you were lucky, to it is the topic for the board every quarter, if not even ad hoc outside that cycle. So
What got easier is that we became cool. Don't you think that?
we are super
We're
cool.
cool.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah, we're Alicia Keys' opening act. We have a question over here.
Yes, hello, Matthias Kucharska, Hülsmann. My follow-up to Tim.
Hi, Matthias.
I also resigned from the corporate world, and we are building a new solution there, and we came here to verify the value proposition is on spot. And all the conversations and everything I've seen, it validates it. Downstairs, we have a lot of vendors. And
Question. Get right to the question.
You mentioned to the infrastructure. I'm curious about, you mentioned the CISOs require also more infrastructure for them to perform their jobs. Could you elaborate on the type of infrastructure that you would be looking for?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what I was saying was some of the CISOs are getting expanded roles, which includes the infrastructure side of the house. You guys would agree?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So their mandates are getting bigger in that role, which is, It depends on your company, it depends on your industry. It's a very good thing for some because, I mean, I will say, you know, in my last few roles, you know, you may have had a traditional CIO, you had your CISO, you may have had a cloud ops team, and you had to somehow make all these teams work really well together on the priority of security. So, but I'm happy to, if you want to grab me afterwards and we can have a sidebar discussion.
But I think that does touch on what you were pointing on. I think that's important to bring out is how much of a team sport this is.
Yeah.
I know I had a video in my old Fusion Center of Mike Rogers talking about cyber being a team sport. We can't do anything without our IT infrastructure partners, our app dev partners, because I know very few CISOs that actually patch anything. We have a question here.
Yeah, so anyone can answer, or all of you can answer. So risk quantification and having a better cyber hygiene is always a difficult talk. So the topic of cyber budget. So all I want to hear is now that the threat landscape is increasing, SEC rules, cyber insurance and all, what worked in your life to make that case for I need more budgets for cyber?
So I don't think it's more budget for cyber, right? And so as, again, I'm going to get back into, oh, do I own patch management, or is that really the CTO? And I think there is a fundamental problem is we as CISOs tried to, well, I'm not a CISO anymore. You all tried to chain yourself to the SEC rules that I'm responsible for that. No, 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 no. There's a partner. There's a 3-letter acronym that is missing from there. Where's your CIO or your CTO? And on my way out here, I got the pleasure of stopping and talking to a board, an SEC board in Omaha. And all in my presentation is about the CIO owns, or the CTO owns, the configuration that creates the risk that the CISO needs to articulate, not own. And the ownership is to the company and the CEO, and is the funding there? So instead of like running after the brand new squirrels that are out there on the CIO floor, have you looked? Ask the question, how much legacy is here? Are you running Windows 2003? Do you still have an inside Exchange server set because you've got a company somewhere that's running on Windows 2003 and you can't go to the cloud? That's where the risk is. And that's where a little bit with, like, I kind of like took offense with the SEC, and it's the CISO. We can't chain ourselves to that. That's a company risk. And we got to continue to articulate it. Yeah, I'm not passionate about this at all. So.
Yeah, the question was primarily, how did you articulate that, and how did you help your organization?
So, I mean, we did everything from the perspective of what it meant to the business, all right? So people who worked for me knew I was a crazy metrics person. I'm a very data-oriented person. So by the time I retired, my monthly operating deck was 400 pages long. And I took my leadership team, as much as they may have hated me for it, through it every month. But that 400 pages turned into 2 statements when I talked to the board, which was, are we protecting our customers' data, and are we ensuring the integrity of our critical systems? And that sort of is also tying to how I went and asked for money, because I didn't ask for money to do this security thing. I asked for money to address this business risk. And then they could make a choice, without necessarily knowing about the tech stuff, about whether that risk versus that money they viewed as a good trade-off. Luckily, if you are, after you get through a year or 2, you build up a degree of credibility, and they are more trusting of your opinion. The first couple of years, they may really dig into your opinion. But they'll eventually, if you're successful and you're good at it, they'll trust your opinion. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I used to focus on what could go wrong here, you know, and really have those deep heart-to-heart conversations with the business. And if what could go wrong here could be prevented or could somehow maybe be detected in a timely manner so that the thing wouldn't get too far out of control, then it was funded. The opposite of that is when somebody said to me, what if I gave you $5 million more? And that was actually another scary moment because the CIO was sitting beside me. And frankly, it's very difficult to do something in a vacuum. I mean, when I was doing manufacturing, I backfilled manufacturing positions on, so that those people could come and help me on my project. So it wouldn't have mattered even if I had gotten more money that year. Those resources weren't necessarily available to me, so it wouldn't have really helped me.
It depends on how you do, like, when we did our budgeting, like, if we looked at a project, I actually budgeted for the resources.
So did I.
For those
So did I.
businesses. And so I actually would give them the money, give them the human capital, because you're right, there's only so much change you can push through a system at any one time. Given time, Val, I see you over there, you're going to get the last question, and then
Should we
I'll
guess
ask.
what he's going to ask? Okay.
No, I'm scared about, because I know Val can go in a lot of different places.
I know.
And then we'll each do a closing statement, and then you'll each.
And if I can just, I mean, for one second over here is, yeah, I mean, I certainly drove a very programmatic approach and only talked about the data to drive the businesses there. And I agree, we're almost always the impetus for them getting more budget or moving it up in the prioritization for the company. But it was, real sausage making. I mean, my last company, I had 28 monthly reviews for 28 different businesses to go through just things like vulnerability management, patch management, progress against those programs. So, it was that laborious. So.
All right, over to Val.
Last question, Val.
I could ask so many, but thank you again for your time and insights here. Val Mukherjee, for those you don't know, Chairman and Founder of Cyber Future Foundation. I would not go to where I'm CISO at because that's my question. How do we de-risk the CISO job? I mean, the definition of jobs changing. I think you touched on a little bit, and we're trying to define the protection areas for CISO. One of them is the professional and personal liability insurance for the CISOs, which no insurers or underwriters are willing to write now. So what do you think would define the job of a CISO that gives a reasonable protection for us and we de-risk that job?
So let's not write a document on the stage right now, but I think the point you're making is important for us. And if you take a look at the current SolarWinds case, irrespective of what SolarWinds did, I think most of us in our community think the focus on Tim is a sign of a lack of understanding about the job. And just to be clear, it has nothing to do with being called a CISO. Whatever the most senior security person is in the company is who they're going to care about, irrespective of title. Little company, big company, title isn't the point. So I think for us, there are two things. One is we need to to de-risk it, we need to educate about what the current reality is, all right? But then I'll go back to what I talked about earlier about this whole idea of a public-private partnership. We need to define a definition of due diligence of what good cyber looks like. We need to develop, almost like you would have for a CFO, a form of accreditation. And I'm not talking about yet another acronym to throw on your thing, but some form of accreditation that ties to the ability to insure an entity. In the meanwhile, if you are a CISO and you don't have D&O insurance from your company, go talk to your boss and get D&O insurance built into your contract.
I have to add one more thing. What would de-risk it would be knowing how long I could get called back. So I have to share the story of being called back. I was subpoenaed 4 years after I left my job. All right? So for de-risking, it means that I would sleep a lot better to know that not all the companies that I work for I couldn't get a subpoena for them tomorrow and suddenly be testifying on behalf of all of them. So I don't even know the answer to that anymore.
And I will give credit to, Team 8, Signet,
Yeah.
many of the law firms have done a great job of pulling together. And I actually took all of them and I made like a 4-pager that has everything happy to send that out so you don't have to read all those. All the guidance for CISOs on how to really protect
Yeah,
themselves.
a lot of different entities have tried to put out some
Yeah.
helpful stuff, and folks like Joe Sullivan and others have been talking a lot about it. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to just ask each of you for a last comment. And so, Maureen, why don't we start with you for a last thought for the group?
So the crowd is the future of cybersecurity. You have great potential. There is going to be no guidebook that says this is what the technology is going to look like in 20 years. You're going to have to continue to learn and grow and come to events like this so you can learn from your peers.
Ask for help. I did it early and often, and the community is always willing to pitch in.
Similar, seek out mentors. I've been very lucky in my career to have some great people take an interest in me and help me and give me guidance. So, and we're all here to help as needed.
And then I'll just follow that up with ask, which is when you've been lucky enough in your life to have been touched by good mentors, pay it forward, all right? Find other people to mentor. What we have today is tribal knowledge. Tribal knowledge gets passed down person to person. So cherish the people who mentor you and find people to mentor. And enjoy Alicia Keys. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.